Okay, let's unpack this. We have a really fascinating collection of sources today, diving deep into these moments where human systems were invented, refined, or, sometimes broke down spectacularly. And we're not focused on just one era or discipline. We're really looking at these foundational moments where people, consciously or not, basically said, okay, enough with the chaos, we need a system.
Exactly. We are, in a way, opening the archives of human systems. And I think what makes this deep dive so interesting is just the sheer diversity of the pillars we're looking at.
Right.
We're going from how ancient people negotiated social order, well, let's be honest, intoxicated, to how they solved the fundamental problem of hunger through chemistry, how they powered their cities, and even how they defined their place in the universe.
And crucially, we're not just looking at the neat, clean, finished products you read about in a textbook, the tidy summaries. We're getting into the messy operational logic.
The friction.
The friction, the contradiction, the collision of egos and physics, and just plain necessity that actually, survive the test of time.
Because lasting knowledge is rarely born in isolation.
Yeah.
It's almost always born from stress. So our mission for you is to quickly extract the core operational rules behind 4 wildly different types of systems.
And give you those surprising aha moments.
Exactly. The moments where you see why things work the way they did, even when they appeared, totally chaotic on the surface.
We're looking for the trade-offs, the hidden costs, and ultimately the efficiencies. So forget the dry lecture hall. We're going to start not in a clean lab or a map room, but by stepping into an environment where dignity is optional.
Circulation is a luxury.
And absolute, probably misplaced confidence is the only currency that really matters.
Let's enter the inner sanctum of the ancient Greek mind.
So you've received the invitation. It has this very serious, imposing title on it. Symposium. Intellectually, that the word means to drink together, but the stated purpose is always something higher.
Right. It's about the pursuit of truth, virtue, morality through, philosophical discussion.
But let's be honest with ourselves. This serious word is the thinnest possible disguise for a group of influential men who are planning to drink a whole lot of wine until their opinions achieve, total independence from their reasoning.
And that experience begins the second you cross the threshold. You immediately have to commit to the environment, your shoes are removed, which is this kind of quiet acknowledgement that you might not be walking straight later.
And then you're forced into the ritual of reclining. And this posture, it isn't accidental, it's systemic.
It absolutely is.
I found the detail on the reclining so insightful. Chairs are intentionally absent. A chair represents posture, structure, self-control, a physical height advantage.
All of which are basically detrimental to the kind of messy intellectual engagement the Greeks were after. You were compelled to lie sideways on this low couch, leaning on one elbow, trying to look comfortable while drinking and debating.
It is physically ridiculous.
It's the ultimate system of shared vulnerability. Your left arm is definitely going to fall asleep, your neck will cramp up. You were trying to maintain a position the human body was just not designed for while, performing these high-level intellectual gymnastics.
But everyone has to commit, because to sit upright or to look too comfortable, that suggests you aren't fully participating in this shared, ridiculous social contract.
And it effectively flattens the hierarchy. When everyone is horizontal, no one literally towers over another person. The authority of a man's rank is sort of temporarily suspended, and his authority has to be earned purely through rhetoric, or more accurately, sheer volume and bravado.
That's a good point. And let's not forget the practical side, which the sources highlight. Reclining makes spilling wine easier without having to stand up.
Which is absolutely critical.
Right, because the primary goal of the evening is essentially controlled intoxication. The couches are all arranged along the perimeter, making this ring of bodies that faces inward, guaranteeing an audience for every idea, whether it's good or just spectacularly bad.
And that brings us to the wine itself, and this kind of illusion of moderation. The central vessel, the kratar, that's where the wine is mixed with water. This wasn't a choice. It was a necessary part of survival.
Yeah, ancient Greek wine was notoriously strong, right? Thick and dark, almost like a syrup.
Exactly. Drinking it straight would result in, immediate incapacitation.
So dilution is key. But that initial sensible ratio that the host announces, say 3 parts water to 1 part wine, that is the last sensible decision of the whole evening.
Right. The purpose of this first phase is very specific. To get the participants just drunk enough to be honest. To strip away that everyday politeness, but ideally just sober enough to still articulate their stripped down opinions.
even if they articulate them poorly.
even if they articulate them very poorly.
And as the evening progresses, you feel that beautiful, warm, dangerous clarity. You think your thoughts are quicker, your wit is sharper, your philosophical insights are deeper, and this is the exact moment the descent begins.
Because your confidence is now inflating way faster than your capacity to critically evaluate your own thoughts.
And in a doomed effort to manage this momentum, an official is appointed, the symposiarch, or the ruler of the drink.
This poor soul. He's responsible for regulating the pace, setting the ratio, and maintaining some kind of semblance of decorum.
I just find the symposiarch tragic. He is the system's conscience, which the system immediately votes to ignore. He announces the rules, everyone nods ceremonially, and then...
And then the guests start aggressively topping off their wine whenever the servant turns his back. The symposiarch's position exists not to enforce order, but really just to give chaos a polite, official head start.
His authority just dissolves the moment the second cup is served.
Once that momentum takes over, the entertainment arrives. The lyre players, the singers, the recitation of poetry. But the sources suggest the true purpose of this music wasn't, necessarily enjoyment.
It was noise generation.
Exactly. It was a rhythmic way to prevent silence and downtime, ensuring constant, loud participation that further softened everyone's intellectual judgment.
And once that judgment is good and soft, the games begin. This is the turning point where the evening stops pretending to be high culture and starts proving things that are entirely unprovable.
We have to detail Karabos. It sounds simple, but it requires this dangerous mix of inebriation and precision. You hold the dregs of wine in your cup, and then, using a specific flick of the wrist, you fling the residue at a target across the room.
A small bronze disc balanced precariously on a stand.
Right. And the point is not just hitting the target, but doing it while you're lying down and using the force of the flung wine to knock the disc off the stand. So it makes this satisfying clatter.
And if you succeed, you are lauded for your skill and bravery. If you miss, the wine splashes onto the floor, or, even worse, another guest. But the volume of the room just kind of absorbs the failure.
The game amplifies bravado and removes all physical and intellectual restraint. And this is the environment where philosophy truly barges in.
Opinions are no longer offered, they are shouted. Everyone speaks with the certainty of having just discovered a lost truth. Nuance is the first casualty of the wine.
Definitely. Arguments simplify into loud assertions. You no longer need to explain why you believe something, you just state it firmly. Because firmness, in this context, has somehow become the only form of evidence.
And you reach that critical stage where you deliver what you believe is the single most brilliant insight ever conceived. You feel this glow of genius. The tragedy is that tomorrow you will only remember the feeling of being brilliant.
Completely divorced from the actual slurring, probably offensive content.
Confidence achieves total independence from clarity.
And this phenomenon is only made worse by the peculiar social dynamics of the room, specifically the deliberate absence of respectable women.
It's a carefully constructed male space.
It is. And that allows male ideas, political and philosophical, to inflate without being stress tested by dissenting or, non-male perspectives. The ideas just bounce off the walls, growing louder and more inaccurate with every pass.
But the sources remind us that women were absolutely present. The musicians, the courtesans, the hetairai, and the entertainers. And these women were often highly educated, articulate, and far more sober than anyone on the couches.
They observed, they listened closely, and they made the mental notes that the men were entirely incapable of retaining. They were the true, accurate chroniclers of the night's intellectual proceedings.
And then there's the anchor of sobriety. We have to address him. The man who is physically and mentally present. He may drink a lot, but for some genetic or purely spiteful reason, it has no effect on his coherence.
He follows every argument, remembers every misstatement, and is terrifyingly coherent.
He is the single most resented man in the room. He will be the terrifying source of tomorrow's accurate recollection, recalling every confident, slurring line spoken accurately and without mercy.
The fact that the Greeks accepted the existence of this sober witness and the female chroniclers shows that the messiness was intentional.
That is the core takeaway. The symposium was a system, not a party. It worked because it was messy. It was a friction machine that took egos, wine, and time, and occasionally produced ideas that mattered.
Great ideas weren't conceived in silent contemplation. They were hammered out in these smoky, uncomfortable rooms, emerging from chaos, contradiction, and, the eventual cleanup by the sober witnesses.
They traded comfort, dignity, and clarity for engagement. And that loud, imperfect contribution, later refined by the few who remembered it, that's what survived the night. Let's transition now from the abstract chaos of the Greek mind, where social friction was used to produce philosophical clarity, to the essential physical control required to transform raw nature into nourishment.
We're moving from the system of the mind to the system of the stomach.
Exactly. We often view ancient cooking through a cultural lens, what they ate, why it tasted good. But long before it was art or culture, cooking was humanity's first efficiency technology. It began, quite simply, with a controlled fire contained by a ring of stones.
Fire solved three fundamental problems at the same time. First, it made food safer by killing pathogens. Second, it softened tough fibers in meat and plants, which meant less chewing.
Which is crucial. The reduction in energy spent just chewing and digesting freed up enormous amounts of time and metabolic energy that could then be invested in social complexity, communication, and, yes, philosophical debates.
A roasted animal fed more people for longer with less energy expenditure per person. Cooking was the catalyst that allowed our ancestors to stabilize, grow larger brains, and start to settle down. And over time, the fire itself became organized.
The hearth. A fixed hearth meant consistent heat, predictable meals, and stable food supplies. And this predictability allowed for settlements and complex social structures to emerge long before agriculture could fully support them. The system of cooking anchored humans to a place.
As cooking became contained, it became bureaucratic. We see the first great kitchen system emerge in ancient Mesopotamia, defined by the technology of clay. The invention of pottery of clay vessels was revolutionary because it allowed for boiling and stewing.
Before pottery, you could roast or you could bake. But boiling allowed people to stretch limited resources, especially meat, which was often a luxury, into nutritious broths and stews that could feed large, dense urban populations efficiently.
Sustenance once again prioritized over indulgence.
Right, and this knowledge became codified. We have sources, clay tablets pressed with cuneiform script, that contain the oldest known recipes in history. These weren't poetic food reviews, they were practical, bureaucratic instructions.
Precise quantities, steps, ingredients. Cooking moved from being an oral, intuitive skill to being documented, preserved, and replicated knowledge. The first food standards were written in wet clay.
And the flavor profiles of these early stews were intensely sophisticated, relying on fermented sauces, the direct ancestors of the great classical flavor enhancers, to provide salty, sour, and savory depth. They understood that taste was chemical complexity.
Now contrast that with the system of ancient Egypt, which was built on absolute repetition and the reliable yet destructive rhythm of the Nile.
Their staples were robust. Bread, made primarily from tough emmer wheat and barley, it came in countless varieties, but the key operational detail is the grinding process. The Egyptians used these massive stone querns, and that grinding action inevitably introduced a lot of sand and grit into the flour.
It was unavoidable. Eating this bread provided nourishment, but over a lifetime, it slowly, relentlessly wore down the teeth of the population. Their primary sustenance carried a physical, systemic cost. Eating was literally abrasive.
And the beer was indispensable. Not the clear carbonated beverage we know, but thick, cloudy, low-alcohol beer brewed from partially baked bread dough. It was a caloric powerhouse, a liquid meal, consumed by men, women, and children.
And crucially, it was safer and more sanitary than the often contaminated water of the Nile. It was survival packaged as refreshment.
Their entire cooking system reflected their cosmic order. Food offerings in tombs weren't just symbolic, they were practical provisions, reflecting this deep-seated belief that the physical need for nourishment continued even after death. Continuity and reliability were the highest values.
Now let's jump to ancient Rome. Here we see a food system shaped by imperialism and class stratification. The wealthy indulged in exotic extravagance, but the majority lived in cramped, insulated apartment blocks without any safe, practical means of cooking large meals indoors.
Which meant necessity birthed the first true mass-market street food culture centered around the Thermopolia.
These were small, ubiquitous food shops, counters lining the streets, embedded with these clay jars called dolia that contained hot, ready-to-eat stews, beans, and sausages.
It was the original fast food. Convenience was everything. You ate quickly, often standing, using your hands, because the city system demanded efficiency of movement.
But the definitive, universal flavor of the Roman Empire, the single most important operational ingredient in their cuisine, was garum. We have to pause here because this stuff defined Roman taste.
It was the ultimate umami bomb. Garum was a pungent, intensely salty sauce made from fermenting fish guts, small fish, and blood, left to decompose slowly in large vats in the sun, often for months.
The scale of this production was industrial. vast complexes were set up, especially along the coasts of Spain and Africa. The smell must have been horrific, but the resulting liquid, strained and bottled, was incredibly valuable. It was used everywhere.
From the simplest street stew to the lavish imperial banquet?
Exactly. Think of it as the ancient world's Worcestershire sauce. It went on everything, masking the flavor of bad meat or just elevating plain vegetables.
So garum is the perfect example of how complex flavor systems required complex trade routes and empire-wide logistics. The Roman food system wasn't just about local production, it was about global extraction and pungent fermentation.
Let's shift dramatically, crossing the Atlantic to the Aztec Empire, where the food system was built on a quiet but brilliant piece of chemistry: nixtamalization.
A knowledge inherited and refined over centuries. The Aztec civilization was built on maize or corn. But the problem is that corn, consumed as a primary staple without modification, leads to a severe nutritional deficiency disease called pellagra.
Because the niacin, the vitamin B3, is chemically locked away.
Nixtamalization was the solution. It involved soaking the dried corn kernels in an alkaline solution, traditionally made from water and slaked lime or wood ash. This seemingly simple step is a crucial chemical process.
The alkaline solution fundamentally changes the corn's molecular structure. It dissolves the pericarp, that tough outer wall, and, most importantly, it chemically unlocks the niacin, making it bioavailable.
This quiet chemical process was essential survival technology. It prevented widespread malnutrition and created a nutritionally complete maize base, the masa.
And the labor involved was immense. After soaking, the corn was rigorously ground on the metate, that curved, flat stone, a task usually performed by women before dawn, tuning the treated kernels into the masa used for tortillas. The physical system of labor was tied directly to the chemical necessity of the food.
And their high-status food? Chocolate. Made from cacao beans, ground and mixed with water, chili, and spices. Bitter, foamy, and cold. It was not a dessert.
No, it was ritual currency and a drink reserved for the elite and for warriors.
Finally, let's briefly touch on the organized efficiency of ancient China and the complexity of ancient India. In China, the driving force behind cooking innovation was conservation, specifically conserving precious fuel.
And the wok is the genius technology here. Thin metal, heats up quickly, requiring high, precise heat for only seconds or minutes. Stir-frying maximized nutrition while minimizing fuel consumption.
And this emphasis on efficiency meant that ingredient uniformity, slicing everything small and identically, was critical for fast, even cooking.
And the whole system was governed by philosophy. The focus on balancing the 5 essential tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, savory, and using food as preventative medicine, categorized by its perceived effects on the body, either warming or cooling. Harmony in the kitchen directly reflected harmony in life.
And in ancient India, we see the early mastery of spice complexity. Turmeric, cumin, black pepper, these weren't added randomly. They were toasted, ground, and layered for flavor depth, but also critically for preservation in hot climates and for aiding digestion.
And you see religious beliefs strongly shaping the diet. The sacred cow leading to a reliance on dairy and clarified butter, or ghee, which provided richness and stability to a largely vegetarian diet. Cooking here was deeply ritualized, aligned with belief and the environment.
So in synthesis, ancient cooking wasn't just finding ingredients. It was accumulated, highly adaptable knowledge. Whether it was the clay pot of Mesopotamia, the nixtamalization of the Aztecs, or the wok of China, simple tools combined with observation solved the essential human problem of turning raw nature into sustained life.
Necessity drove every single one of these innovations.
We shift now from the physical structure of nourishment, the calories, the chemistry, the flavor, to the invisible structure of power that underlies the entire modern world. We are talking about energy and the man who saw it flowing decades before anyone else, Nikola Tesla.
It's an almost mythical biography. Born during a violent lightning storm, the midwife declared he would be a child of darkness, only for his mother to correct her. No, he will be a child of light.
And it was an accurate prediction for a mind that truly operated on a higher electrical frequency.
His internal world was defined by this high frequency. As a child, he experienced powerful, debilitating visual hallucinations, sudden, blinding flashes of light, and realistic images of objects and scenes. Instead of breaking him, he trained his mind to manage them by deliberately visualizing objects, a process he mastered.
This ability became his greatest systemic strength. He didn't rely on trial and error like so many of his contemporaries. Tesla could visualize entire complex machines, test them in his head for weeks, rotate them, see the friction points, and correct every single flaw mentally.
Before ever needing to lift a tool or sketch a diagram.
Right. He operated on certainty, not guesswork.
He had that demanding, rigid upbringing. His father, a priest, wanted him to be a man of letters. But his illiterate mother, who was a brilliant inventor of small household tools, provided him with that intuitive, inventive spark.
And his famous eccentricities, especially the compulsive relationship with patterns and repetitions, particularly multiples of 3, they began early.
The turning point for his career path came with illness. Bedridden with cholera as a teenager, he only secured his father's blessing to study engineering by making a bargain. If he survived, he would be allowed to study machines. That recovery sealed his focus on electricity.
His brilliance was immediately evident in university, but so was his inability to conform. He challenged professors publicly, gambled away his tuition money, and never formally completed his degree. He was already designing machines the world just wasn't prepared for.
And his obsession crystallized around the problem of direct current, or DC, which Thomas Edison had successfully commercialized. DC had a fatal flaw: voltage drop. To power a city, you needed a large, inefficient power station roughly every mile.
Which made long-distance power transmission impossible.
Exactly. Tesla saw the solution in alternating current, or AC. He described AC flow as elegant, like breath. But the key operational difference was the transformer. We have to explain the transformer.
Absolutely. The transformer is this deceptively simple device that allows you to step up or step down the voltage. With AC, you could generate electricity at a relatively low voltage, step it way up for efficient long-distance transmission with minimal loss, and then
crucially, step it back down safely right before it entered the consumer's home or factory. DC could not do this efficiently. The transformer is what made AC scalable and economically viable for a global grid.
And this tension defined his early career when he came to the US and worked for Edison. It was a collision of methodologies. Edison, the pragmatist, believed in expensive trial and error. Tesla, the theorist, believed in visualization and precision.
Edison distrusted AC, calling it dangerous, mostly because it represented a threat to his established DC infrastructure.
And the famous break came when Tesla claimed Edison promised him a massive $50,000 bonus for improving his DC dynamos. After Tesla succeeded, Edison reportedly laughed the promise off as a joke, saying Tesla didn't understand American humor.
Humiliated and penniless, the man who envisioned the future of global power had to take up a shovel.
The sources recount the sheer human tragedy of that period. Nikola Tesla, the singular mind responsible for the alternating current motor, literally digging ditches and burying the obsolete DC cables he knew were already destined for failure.
It was the ultimate systemic insult.
But he found allies and investors, namely George Westinghouse, who recognized the scalable potential of his AC system. When Tesla finally demonstrated his AC motor, it was a flawless piece of engineering, smooth, self-starting, and scalable.
And this ignited the brutal war of the currents. Edison, desperate to save his DC investment, launched this vicious public fear campaign. He publicly electrocuted animals, dogs, horses, even an elephant, to try and convince the public that AC was deadly.
Tesla's response wasn't counter-propaganda, it was demonstration and control. He famously demonstrated the safety of AC by passing electricity harmlessly through his own body to light lamps.
And the argument was settled economically. AC won because it was fundamentally more efficient and cost-effective for long-distance power.
He had won the war, yet victory came at this immense personal cost. When financial pressure mounted on Westinghouse during the aggressive competition with Edison, Tesla voluntarily and astonishingly tore up a contract for lucrative royalties that would have made him one of the wealthiest men in history.
He traded immense generational wealth for the survival of the idea. He assumed the importance of his work would provide for him, but he just disliked the bureaucracy of contracts and commercial negotiation. His ambition quickly expanded far beyond simple city lighting.
He dreamed of transmitting power and messages wirelessly across the entire globe, freely and endlessly.
And this leads us to the monumental tragedy of Wardenclyffe on Long Island, a massive transmission tower designed to be the centerpiece of this global free energy network.
This was the fatal alignment issue. Tesla wanted to give energy away. His primary investor, JP Morgan, however, wanted to profit from measured, metered, controlled energy transmission.
So when Morgan realized Tesla's system couldn't be easily monetized or controlled, that the system was designed to provide power without requiring a meter, he pulled the funding.
Construction stopped. The tower stood unfinished, a towering monument to an idea that was Technologically possible, but commercially impossible within the existing profit system. It was eventually dismantled and sold for scrap to pay off debts.
Tesla refused to abandon the dream, but he had lost the structural support he needed.
His subsequent retreat was absolute. His eccentricities solidified into these debilitating rituals, extreme germ aversion, an obsession with the number 3, and his only true emotional attachments were to animals, particularly the pigeons he fed and tended to religiously.
He became isolated, announcing unproven, fantastical inventions like death rays, shifting from a world-changing visionary to a public curiosity.
He died alone in 1943. His papers were seized by the government, and many of his ideas, handheld wireless communication, remote control radar systems, were just stunningly accurate predictions that simply arrived decades too early.
The irony is profound. He traded immense personal wealth for the pursuit of a universal, free idea. And the infrastructure he ensured, alternating current, is permanent. Every factory, every high-tension wire, every city grid still runs on the principles he devised.
He secured the permanence of the system at the expense of his own comfort and reward. We move now to the most conceptual system of all, how humans define and organize space. Ancient maps were rarely objective mirrors of reality. They were instead powerful tools for memory, survival, and control.
They were subjective statements of cultural priority.
Exactly. Before they became physical objects drawn on clay or parchment, maps were internalized. They were ways of thinking about space, stored in songs, stories, and oral histories. Early humans mapped because survival depended on knowing where the resources were and where the danger lay.
And a primary principle was relevance, not modern geographic accuracy.
That's why these early physical maps look so strange to us. They were functionally distorting. Water sources might be dramatically exaggerated because they mattered most. Sacred places were often placed at the absolute center.
Rivers might run in physically impossible directions because the map was fundamentally a statement of priorities. And critically, ancient people often did not separate space from time.
Right. Mapping the Earth was tied directly to mapping the heavens. Stars were celestial roads. The movement of seasons defined the map's usefulness. To map the world was also to map time itself, linking the ephemeral movement of humanity to the eternal movement of the cosmos.
The earliest known physical maps emerging from Mesopotamia were born from absolute bureaucracy. Pressed into small clay tablets, they weren't guides for sailors, they were guides for administrators. They existed to organize, divide, and tax agricultural land.
They were official economic records.
The Babylonian Imago Mundi is the perfect cultural example of this. It placed the city of Babylon firmly at the center, surrounded by the known world and the cosmic ocean. This map did not reflect objective physical distance, it reflected hierarchy and worldview. Babylon was central because it was central to meaning and political power.
The map was a statement of hierarchy.
Right. And Roman maps, by sharp contrast, were entirely stripped of philosophy and cosmology. They existed purely as brutal tools of logistics and authority. Rome didn't care what the world looked like from a cosmic or intellectual perspective. They cared how quickly and efficiently a legion could move through it.
Look at the Tabula Peutingeriana, that incredible surviving copy of a Roman road map. It stretched horizontally like a ribbon, grossly inaccurate geographically. Roads mattered more than rivers. Cities were just dots marked by stylized buildings.
And all distances were measured absolutely from Rome, the fixed reference point. The map ended precisely where Roman control ended. It was an extension of political and military authority.
We see a different kind of authority in the Egyptian system, born from the chaos and restoration of the annual Nile flood. Since the river destroyed and then restored property boundaries every year, mapping was an act of constant restoration, relying heavily on geometry to redraw boundaries and tax plots.
The Nile also defined their entire orientation system. South was often placed at the top of the map, reflecting the upstream flow of the river toward the Mediterranean. Direction carried powerful meaning. West, where the sun set and the desert began, was inextricably associated with death and the afterlife.
So their maps of the afterlife were incredibly detailed, practical guides for the soul's journey, showing gates, obstacles, and deities.
The great shift came with the ancient Greeks, who introduced the theoretical turn. Their maps were born not from logistics or bureaucracy, but from philosophy. They began asking, what does the world actually look like, regardless of what our eyes tell us?
And this intellectual leap led to the radical idea of a spherical Earth and the necessity of defining space using unseen conceptual tools like latitude and longitude.
The mathematician Eratosthenes, for example, calculated the circumference of the Earth with astounding accuracy, using only geometry, shadows, and the knowledge of the distance between two cities.
They treated the world as a geometric problem that could be known through reason even where experience failed. Greek maps were intellectual arguments, hypotheses about reality itself, but they were rarely used for actual navigation.
For a radical contrast, we have to look to Polynesia, where mapping was an entirely embodied, tactile experience. There was no writing system, no parchment, yet Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using mental maps.
Their physical maps, the stick charts, were not taken to sea. They were teaching tools, called rebelibs or mitos, left on land. They were constructed of reeds and small shells, not to show the location of islands.
But to show the subtle energy systems of the ocean.
Right, they mapped wave patterns. The navigators understood how the great ocean swells intersected and how they refracted and bent as they struck distant, unseen islands. Navigation was tactile.
You felt where you were through the motion of the canoe, sensing the subtle rhythms of the intersecting wave systems. Experience replaced instruments. Deep integration with the environment replaced abstract calculation.
And finally, in ancient Asia, mapping was rooted in harmony and cosmology. In China, sophisticated grid systems were used early on, aligning human space with qi, the vital energy flowing through the landscape.
Mapping here was ethical. The principle of feng shui meant that choosing where to build a house or a city was tied to maintaining balance between heaven, earth, and humanity. You lived inside a diagram that reinforced cosmic order.
And in India, spatial understanding was preserved in religious texts, focusing on sacred axes like Mount Meru and pilgrimage routes. Time and geography merged. Knowing where you were and also meant knowing when you were within cycles of duty and ritual obligation.
So the final synthesis is clear. Ancient maps are confessions. They announce their perspective. They reveal that humans have always lived in multiple spaces simultaneously. The physical space we inhabit, the social space we negotiate, and the sacred space we believe in.
Relevance, utility, and cultural statement, not modern accuracy, was a measure of their systemic success. Hashtag #LTRO. What an incredible conceptual journey. We started with the sheer vulnerability of a reclining philosopher, trading his dignity for the philosophical engagement that emerged from messiness, and we ended with the quiet, tragic endurance of a solitary inventor whose visionary system, alternating current, now powers our global world.
We've seen that all successful systems, whether a drunken symposium, a global power grid, or a system for breaking down corn chemically, are human machines designed to turn friction, hunger, ego, and vision into something lasting.
And they consistently required a systemic trade-off.
Absolutely. The Greeks traded comfort and restraint for intellectual engagement. The ancient chefs traded extensive labor and grinding teeth for the stability of a reliable food supply. Roman maps ignored reality to prioritize pure logistics.
And Nikola Tesla traded an immense generational profit for the permanence and universality of his idea.
And what endures are those hard-won structures? The paradox that philosophy was born from alcohol-fueled argument. The global lesson that necessity forces chemical innovation, like nixtamalization, which saves millions of lives. The tragic realization that progress doesn't always reward its architects.
And the truth of mapping, that we don't map the world as it is, but as it matters to us.
Every lasting human system requires us to abandon one comfortable metric, be it immediate profit, physical ease, or perceived accuracy, in favor of a deeper, more enduring efficiency or truth.
Which raises an important question for you to consider as you move through the systems of your own day. What essential human need are we currently trying to solve in technology, in politics, in business, where the greatest, most lasting solution might require us to abandon the most comfortable, the most profitable, or the most conventional approach?
What are the sober men and the unfunded visions of our current system?
Go explore that idea.